How can temporary use impact post-industrial redevelopment? Hi, my name is Marcin Wojciech-Żebrowski, and this is the newest episode of Urbcast, my podcast about urbanism, architecture, cities, and many more. And today we will continue one of my favorite topics, which is the industrial transformation of our cities. And we will focus especially on the temporary use in those transformations. Almost a month ago, I spoke with Lake Hein, who is part of NREP, the biggest Scandinavian real estate developer, but also a co-CEO of the Tunnelfabrikkenwhich, which is a project that we will discuss today. Last time, we spoke about the role of the real estate in urban development. And today, I will take this conversation even further with the second of the CEO of the Tunnelfabrikken. My guest today is Laust Christian Holm Poulsen, who together with Lake rethinks urban development, culture, living and community by steering the project called Tunnelfabrikken. Laust is an entrepreneur and experienced visionary. Laust shares his experience not only from the Tunnelfabrikken development, but also from the previous projects that he was responsible of. For example, he is also the founder and chairman of TAP1, which is a part of the Toll Group. And as a part of this company, Laust was responsible for transforming a Carlsberg brewery into a modern experience venue in 2009. I'm asking Laust how can he use his previous experience from working with such an industrial buildings and use this in the context of the Tunnelfabrikken, which is an old factory located in Nordhavn, the new so-called North Harbor district located in the north of Copenhagen. We will discuss, is it worth to transform industrial buildings, what is happening in the Tunnelfabrikken, how to turn temporary use into a longer-term perspective, what are the lessons learned from the previous experience of Laust, should we, and if yes, how can we prevent gentrification in industrial transformation projects, and how will the future development of Tunnelfabrikken look like? If you are a fan of urban transformation, regeneration, and industrial transformation, I think that you are in a good place, good time, and let's dive into the newest episode of Urbcast. Hello, Laust, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Maybe I could just shortly introduce myself. My name is Laust, and I'm the co-CEO of Tunnelfabrikken.
We are here together talking about the perspective on Tunnelfabrikken. We'll talk about rethinking urban development, the culture of living and community, and we will use the Tunnelfabrikken as an example. We are here now in NREP, in Nordhavn, the Northern Harbor, and I think that this is a good starting point for the discussion. So to place the Tunnelfabrikken somewhere in the map of Copenhagen, what should we actually know about Nordhavn, the North Harbor of Copenhagen, in context of the development of the city of Copenhagen?
Nordhavn is an industrial port, or used to be. It still is, partly. It's situated a little bit north of the center of Copenhagen. It's the part is called Østerbro. It's a natural prolongment of that. It's been under development for many years now, but the outer North Harbor, where Tunnelfabrikken is situated, has not been developed. And it's actually not meant to be developed in big scale for the next 10-15 years. But Tunnelfabrikken is like ahead in that term, and we are something called a rækkefølgeplan in Denmark, where you actually, this is the way where you do the city development. We've got like a step in before, so we're starting out where there's not so much else right now. And it's actually situated in Tunnelfabrikken, which is a big construction made for making the elements for the tunnel, the Øresundstunnel, back in the days. So they were actually made and where they sailed out and dropped to the ocean sea from that point.
I think it's important to emphasize the industrial character of the North Harbor and also of Copenhagen in general. It was a very industrial city. And what is very exciting to observe nowadays as an urbanist is how the city is changing. And Nordhavn is for sure a part of it, because it is said that in 40 years, Nordhavn will become a vibrant waterfront city, providing homes for over 40,000 inhabitants, but also another 40,000 of workplaces. But all of this is kind of happening on the ground, which used to be very industrial.
Yeah.
So how this transformation is happening, what should we be, or also you are as designers and you as developers, what should we be aware of while working in such a context?
I think that the city of Copenhagen have learned a lot from Ørestaden of what not to do, and they're trying to implement that in the North Harbor in a better way.
Which is like a district in the south of Copenhagen, which is known to not be the best, maybe, urbanistic idea.
Yeah, mainly because, the whole community part, the whole way that the city is made is more like, okay, you live here, you work here, you don't interact as much with each other. And there's another thing, of course, which I think is important to mention with Tunnelfabrikken, is that it's an old building, so it's a renovation project. It's a big renovation project, so it's almost a new building. But doing that also confines you into some framework that's important when you develop a city, I think, because it makes the diversity of the city. Because you wouldn't, if you started all new, you wouldn't build it like that, because it's a massive building. The structure is almost 200 meters on the one length and 150 on the other, and it's 29 meters high, so it's a massive structure. So I think that's really important in terms of the development. North Harbor also, of course, because the world has changed in that way, so it's a lot of focus on sustainability when we develop this area. And the Tunnelfabrikken should be a lighthouse within that as well. And sustainability is not only, of course, the climate-wise, but also economically, of course, and socially. So we work a lot with how can we balance these three things, which is so important for this development. And I think at some point we should talk about the diversity, not only in the buildings, in the structures we make, but also in the way we have the inhabitants and the tenants of the buildings.
Definitely, this is something worth discussing. And I have some questions to you, because it's so interesting to me to get to know the developer's perspective, but also you've been working with big halls, with big structures, and you've been turning them into all other places, into event halls, and you kind of made business case out of it as well. And this is so interesting because often we focus on those design details and how the facade looks like. But it's so important to revive the city as well, and also to try to connect different interests, right? We can talk about the people who might be protesting against the building or renovating such a building. We might talk about different developers and different users of the space. So there are a lot of different conflicts maybe, or maybe just interests, let's put it that way. So just to summarize that, why is it worth to transform such a building?
Yeah, I think it's worth to transform the building for two reasons. The obvious one is, of course, that to reuse old buildings, then you use less materials, and also in a sustainability perspective, it's always a good idea to reuse what is already there. And then the other perspective I just briefly touched before is the way that you develop new parts, new cities. So this area, Nordhavn, which was a lot of open space as well, so it's a lot of new buildings in the development. It's so important to have the heritage with the old buildings, transforming them into be a part of the new city. And it creates a visual diversity, which I think is really important. And in terms of the tenants, of the people using it and all that I think is one of the main ideas and focuses from this, is that we should be able to have a multifunctional use and multi-tenants, and not only have, we have offices, or we have people living quarters. So this is actually also the first time we haven't found a project like this anywhere in the world, where you put so many functions under one roof. And the idea is mainly to secure also that a lot of the functions that normally are in temporary buildings. And you mentioned that I've worked with other buildings like this, and it's true. But a lot of them have been within a time span 10, 15 years because they had to be developed into something more profitable financially afterwards. And there wasn't a strategy of how could we actually implement the culture and all the other functions that we want, but in a viable, long perspective way. So I think that's the unique part about this project, is that the group behind, which is NREP, is one of the partners, the biggest partner, the offices we're sitting in now. And then the City and Port Development, which is a public development company who also owns part of this project. Their objective is to develop the North Harbour, and a small developer called Union Kol, who's situated in Nordhavn and knows Nordhavn from the beginning, has been through that journey. So I think they actually went into this project not like you normally do, where you have a fund or something and then you have to build it and you sell it off. So it's a long-term project. They're all committed to keeping it like this. And they are also committed to, on the short term, look less profits, because we think in the long term we can actually generate the same profits. So that's one of the objectives, is to secure that. So we are really committed not only to building this, but also to operating it. So the operations, in terms of getting the right community, the right feel of this whole is really important. And in that terms, I think we don't have like this. There's not like one price. Normally if you go into an office building, it's this amount of money per square meter to rent. Here we have differentiated prices. So the people who have more money, they will also pay more, and the people who have less money will also pay less. But the main part is that everybody has to contribute. You cannot just rent and lock yourself in and you have to contribute into the community. So for example, there could be we talk with some light designers. They might be able to sit there for free, but they will give back in terms of they will decorate the building with light design and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting because there, as you've mentioned, it will be a very big mix of use in this building. And we can talk about those 6 core themes: the art and culture, the build and innovate, live and learn, craft and workshops, play and workshops, and wood and produce. But this is, I assume, when the development is done. What is happening in the Tunnelfabrikken right now?
Right now, I mean, we've used a lot of time on getting the local plan. Is like the
local plan.
Local plan, yeah. So we haven't actually built anything yet, but we're starting within next year, the end of next year. So right now it's been mainly an empty shell, but we've had temporary things in there. So we've had art exhibitions and artists working there, and have some small artisans who are there and making things right now. But in time, of course, this will change. But we would like to break the chain that normally you have, the artist, the culture, they will come first when it's cheap, before it's developed. And then there will come someone, and then they will be kicked out, and it will be developed, and it will be. But actually, the energy, people would like to live close to this. So it's actually a pity that you have these areas where you have all the culture, and then people say, oh, this is a cool area, I want to live there. And they go and just get development, they live there, and all the culture dies. So that's one part of the Tunnelfabrikken. Then there's a lot of super interesting perspectives because we are situated in the outer Nordhavn. So we have had the possibility to do a lot of different things. For example, in terms of energy, in Copenhagen, in Denmark, you have a duty to connect to the fjernvarme grid. It's like an energy grid. But here we have actually got a dispensation not to do that. So we are trying something new with a company called Energy Machines. So we are actually making the building into an energy machine. So we have deep drilling where we store and generate both heat and cool. And we have solar panels, and we have they change. So everybody, and I'll get back to that, but when some of the tenants, the students, we have students housing in the building, when they shower, for example, the heat from the water is used to heat up the venue or rooms. But in order to just comment on the functions, you mentioned all these categories, and they've been important when we developed the project. Right now, we are in a phase where we are actually breaking these silos down a little bit in order to secure the way they work together, the way they come together. But we're going to have a lot of, there's going to be student housing out there. In the area, within the actual building, there'll be around 600 students living. Within the area, we'll have, at the outside area, we actually have 12 acres of land that can be used. There will be some temporary student developments also, so it'll be around 1,000 students in Tunnelfabrikken. We'll have workshops or a tool shop where we'll have like artisans of all kinds being able to both in smaller scale have their production, sell their stuff, all that part. We have a huge, we have 20,000 square meters of, this is what we call Build and Innovate. It is offices, but it's with the focus. Right now we're working on a big food and climate hub with the companies that want to transform the part and help innovate within that area. We have a big venue in the now, which is actually going to be like the heart chamber or the central part of the building, so that everybody's supposed to use it as like an extension of their own area. There's a lot of common areas. There's a big food areas, restaurants. So there's also retail. So there's a lot of things there. But the main thing is, again, the thing that you cannot just be a tenant. You have to live into some of the values of the building to be a tenant. And for example, in the office space, NREP is going to move there as well. And they will not be able to have their own canteen and do things. They'll actually be committed to eat together in the main like eating hall or dining area with everybody. So everybody like comes together and everything. So it's really important that way. And in terms of leisure and stuff, it's also important that we work together.
I'm glad you've mentioned this temporary use, because this is a very known tool in cities worldwide to first like put the place. It might be an old industrial building on this like so-called mental map of the city, right? So that the citizens start to recognize the place. And I think that happened here in Copenhagen as well with the Refshaøen, which is like the island with the temporary solutions, with food trucks, with some art as well. But this is only like this first initial stage to kind of make the place more known. And there is a lot of leisure, and it's completely packed with people during the summer months. But this is just a phase, right? And after that, there will be a new development. But you've already, I think, mentioned that a bit, that it's different in that case, right? That you really would like to integrate this kind of early comers into the project.
Like it's a must for the project. They have to be like permanent tenants of the project. So we believe that the energy that they create will be able to, in the big picture, will be able to generate also the economy to match other developments like that. It will take some time, but we think that there is a viable financial case in this as well. And this is also one of the things that we'd like to show, so people would want to try the same. Now there is a general problem in developments like that, is that people don't see as long-term. So if you see more short-term, it's more difficult to actually make a business case where you integrate so much culture and other parts.
I also wanted to talk a bit about your previous experience with transformation, because you are a founder of TAP 1, which was the part of TAL Group, which is basically the way you transform an old building into a new venue. And this is something you basically did as well with the Carlsberg Brewery, right?
Yeah.
Do you see any patterns that maybe you could also briefly mention that experience? And do you see any patterns, any lessons learned that you could also use in the case of Tunnelfabrikken?
I mean, for sure. I mean, one of my main motivations of joining this project is actually that the people behind the consortium or the owners of the project, they have a vision to actually change this whole thing, to actually give a permanent space to a lot of the things that normally are in temporary spaces. And in terms of TAP 1, which was actually, we started in the Carlsberg area, it was actually the same part. We looked at the area that had to be transformed, and how could that be done, and how could we fill out the space of 5 to 10 years where everything was planned and before the building went on. And I think a lot of people enjoyed this whole grounds, what happened on the grounds. And I think it was a hard break when they actually, okay, now we start the new chapter, and then we develop office space and living space without actually really integrating these. And it's because they didn't really, there's a lot of different cultural use in the temporary period, but there wasn't a strategy to carry them onto the new part and actually also help them maybe to be financially viable in the new situation. So I think there's, for me, that's a big thing, is actually to say, okay, how can we take the parts that actually have a viable financial idea or company and take them into a more permanent project? And again, look at how can this help others. So we might have a cultural venue or something that will not be able to make the same money as office spaces, but they will provide services for the office spaces that will make the rent per square meter a little bit higher over there. So it will all balance out. So this is one of the perspectives. But I mean, the both projects, and now tab 1 is in Kløverbyen in Amager, and it's always hard to do these things on where you don't have the perspective, where you only have a certain amount of years. And for me, it was also as just a small fish in this part. I don't have the same financial possibilities, and that's been a great cooperation to meet the people behind NREP and City and Port and Union Coal that actually was willing to invest in a project like that. That's why I was so interested in this part.
I'm wondering about what happens when the area is really attractive and it's really known among Copenhageners. You can, of course, argue if that's an advantage or disadvantage, but it leads to some kind of gentrification with time, right? The part of the city that we are discussing, the old industrial site being transformed into something new, attracts new tenants, attracts also people that can afford more expensive spaces, office spaces or housing. And with time, it might push out the old users, right, of a certain space. Do you see a threat of that happening around Tunnelfabrikken here in Nordhavn? And if yes, do you have any ideas of how to prevent that? Or should we even prevent that?
I think we should work towards escaping a more multicultural and not escape these ghettos. And I think actually that Copenhagen and Denmark in general have a lot of things where they actually try to change that. There's a law that you have to build X amount of more cheap housing when you do developments, and that's also what we do out there. I think Tunnelfabrikken will be a part of the solution. Of course, it's a big development. As you said, there will be just in the outer North Harbor, there will be 40,000 people living and 40,000 people working.
According to the plan, of course.
According to the plan, yeah. So we will contribute what we can in terms of that we actually make sure that we have space for people that doesn't have the same amount of money. So we will have tenants that doesn't have that financial background that you normally have to have in a place like North Harbor. It is, for the new developments, it's pretty high prices. And we just hope that the energy and the vision from Tunnelfabrikken will spread in the outer North Harbor. So you will pick up on those ideas that we've used, because we'll have some time before the main development in the outer North Harbor will start to show that there's actually a good business case in that. And actually, there's so many interesting things happening right now. I mean, of course, with the sustainability in terms of making sustainable buildings in general, is also NREP is working with a project right now where it has to do with about how to get finance. If you do sustainable buildings, you should also be able to get finance at a cheaper rate and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things going on. There's also, I think, very slowly the financial sector beginning to look at, okay, could this not be so unsecure as we think right now? Because they're not normally, we really want to lend money to projects like that, but to understand that this is actually a low risk because of the way it's put together, because of the multiple use and stuff like that. So that's the case we have to make so that people understand it and can follow. That's the idea and the dream.
That's interesting perspective, and I'm glad that I asked that, because when you ask an architect maybe or a local leader or an activist, they working on such a project, they would probably say that they would like to avoid the gentrification, right? Because it will influence in not such a positive way the existing users of the space. But from the developer's perspective, those places getting vibe of being a cool place where people go and people hang out and meet, and this is where they would like to spend their Friday evening. It is actually a good message, right? It increases the value.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we have to show that it actually does, because I think for developers, I mean, for this particular project, Tunnelfabrikken, you have the people behind who actually have a vision to actually say, okay, we want to invest in this, we believe in this, and we are there for a long term. But main developments are like big funds going, and they need to get a return, and as high as possible, because it's you and I's pension funds and all, we want to get the biggest return. So they go for where they can get the biggest return. And that has been office space and living space. So if we need to like challenge that a little bit, we need to show that there's a financial viable business case in this. So this is also a big part of this project, is to show that you can make the same amount of money doing it differently, and you can get like a lot of other surpluses in the process, hopefully.
Maybe pension funds investing in the cities, in housing, in offices is a story for different discussion. It's also pretty complex, and how it transforms the market and city development. Let's stick to Tunnelfabrikken today, and just to kind of summarize it, when the project will be done, will there be such a point that it's done, or it's just a starting point of a further development of this part of North Harbor?
I mean, Tunnelfabrikken will, as a building, be done in 2026. And then we start with what I call the operation phase. So this is a new chapter. So it's not like, okay, we build it, then it's rented out and we leave it. This is a process of making this whole community and this whole collaboration together with the tenants, and to make that like a powerhouse. So it will be an ongoing thing. And in terms of the North Harbor, I hope that Tunnelfabrikken will be that beacon for the rest of the development. So all the learnings that we have from this project and how to integrate it with the rest of the developments in a positive way. I mean, in general, North Harbor and the part of that's already developed, the part closest to the city, have done a lot of positive things. You know, they've worked really, put some things down. So, say, for example, all ground floor storage has to be open. So it has to be shops, foods, whatever, open. You cannot have a closed facade there. And it gives, already you can see from a new development, it gives a whole other life than you have in, for example, Ørsted and other places. So I think that as an area, we've already learned a lot, but I hope that Tunnelfabrikken for sure will be a beacon for a lot more. And if you should like summarize, you could see the multiple use, the multiple functions within like a city under one roof, as we call it, because it's really close proximity to everything. And that's also one of the things that is talked about, is actually a sustainable way to live, is to live more where you don't have to transport yourself so long to get into different things. Tunnelfabrikken will also be like it's a function, it's a structure. That's so important for the further development. That's also why the city and port is involved, is because this will make it much more attractive to live in the outer North Harbor. And then, of course, the whole work with the sustainability part, within how to make the buildings sustainable, how to make renovations like this in a sustainable way, how to make new energy solutions, new solutions in general. So to challenge what's done before.
I know it is an exercise for imagination to the listeners right now to try to portray and visualize the Tunnelfabrikken that we are discussing in this podcast. So I would like to ask you to share some information with the listeners. Where could they find something more about the project? But also, could you share a book recommendation close to the topic?
I will start by saying that right now there's not so much information about Tunnelfabrikken. There is a website, there's some pictures and a very brief description. And then I think I'll come back to the book maybe if I can find something I think is right. But I would like to just give maybe a little bit more of a picture into Tunnelfabrikken. The idea and the vision, the ambition is that there will be 5,000 people daily visiting or staying, living, playing in this space. So if you imagine, a couple of thousand people going there to work, but also to play afterwards, sports, whatever that could be done. We have the 1,000 student housing people living there, staying there, taking their Friday drink there. We have all the artisans, like production things, but selling their stuff. So this whole ecosystem of life is so important. And I think one of the really important pictures we need is also, and we didn't talk about that before, is the multiple use, not only from the different tenants, but also in terms of the 24-hour around the clock. So it's so important that we have life at all times. So for example, meeting spaces for the offices, in the evenings they would be used in aften, not night school, but evening schools and stuff like that. They'll come in and do it for different stuff. So we have this energy all around. So the canteen, for example, is not only open as that, there's also a restaurant at the evening. And the food waste is made into other food packages, for example, for the students to use for whatever, cheap lunch. We're going to have there's a small hall outside the structure where we're talking about now to do food upcycling, so food waste. So if you have the food waste, you take it and you generate maybe new food products and put them back into Tunnelfabrikken. So this whole idea, this whole life. And then another thing is, of course, the area is a unique thing. It will not be like that forever because there will be developments around. But in the beginning, in the first 15 years, there'll be 12 acres around Tunnelfabrikken. It can be used for student housing, but also for gardens, for all sorts of things, sports, this part. So it will be a quite unique area in Copenhagen. So I hope that gives a little bit. The feeling is always different, but it's the vibrant life that we want to take to a new level in terms of what you've seen in other places.
But if anyone is visiting Copenhagen, or is living here, we recommend going there and seeing the area and the Tunnelfabrikken, which is in the making right now.
Yeah, you can always take a bicycle. It's a little bit better now. There's a lot of construction right now, so we have it's not the best place to bicycle, but it's getting better, and there is some nice paths out there. So to just go out there on a nice sunny day to see the massive structure and the area around is, and the North Harbor area is nice. The inner part that's already developed.
And I will add a link. There is some information about Tunnelfabrikken, maybe, as you said, not that much, but there is some. So I will also add the link to the project so everyone can just see.
Yeah, perfect.
Any book?
Oh, I can just, top of my mind, think of one I would recommend just for this area. This is, there's so many parts of this. So this is, I'll get back to that.
Okay, but that would be the last question.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for sharing this perspective on Tunnelfabrikken, but also the perspective of how can you put the puzzle pieces together to make the investment in a longer term, kind of, right? So just to invest first in this temporary use and try to attract people to stay there for longer. So Laust, thank you very much for being part.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the newest conversation in Urbcast together with Laust, and I hope that we've been able to introduce you the concept behind the temporary use that you can find in a Tunnelfabrikken project. If you would like to get to know something more, please have a look in the episode's description where I added links to the interesting readings. If you would like to stay in touch with Urbcast, you can visit the website at urbcast.pl and sign up for the bi-weekly newsletter, in which you will find not only the newest episode, but also some interesting articles and events happening within the urbanism and architecture industry. Thank you and talk to you soon.